Hi, and thank you for joining me for another short talk. And today, friends, I want to explain to you how the books of the prophets made their way into what we call the Bible. And the reason this talk is so important is that there is so much that has arisen because of these books that honestly, we could easily say that Judaism has even changed because of them. Now, what do I mean by that? Friends, no one could deny that if it wasn't for these books, notions of Mashiach, Techiyat HaMeitim, Shadim, and all the characters that pertain to the topic of Shadim, self-distinguishing Malachim, Gehenna, and redemption or salvation from Gehenna, right? All these notions would not exist in Judaism today and in Christianity or even Islam if it wasn't for these books of the prophets. So tonight, friends, I want to lay down a quick framework for how these books came to be and what place do they and should they ultimately hold in Judaism. Mainly because, as Jews, we do not have the luxury of walking around thinking that everything we have in our Bible is divinely inspired. In other words, unlike other belief systems whose religion began after their canon was compiled, our books, or really the vast majority of what appears in our Bible, actually was written, compiled, and canonized pretty late in our history. In other words, as Jews, with only a little bit of research, we can easily dissect the books that our belief system considers important without harming the integrity of the Amunah. This is really something that no other religion can claim. For example, the average Christian and or Muslim believes that any other book that predates their final set of books is both inferior to their new addition and in equal importance to the other books that surround it. For example, I was discussing Judaism with a Christian the other day, and he tells me that he considers all the books in what we call Tanakh equally inspired. In other words, he calls it all Torah. Now, this, from a Jewish perspective, is very problematic, mainly because the central work of our religion or our belief system is the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, and specifically the commandments contained within them. Now, it's true that the Almighty instructs us to heed the words of the prophets, but only their words in regard to their instructions. In other words, only the portions that guide us back to Torah, mainly because not even a prophet could add to the Torah. So, what's all the hype? In other words, the only reason we have the section of the prophets or Nevi'im in Tanakh is only to give us a historical account of the life and times of the prophets and how the Almighty used them in Jewish history, and that's all. And it wasn't until the Reform movement in the 1800s that compiled what we call Tanakh, at least amongst Jews today, that we began to lose focus on Torah. Actually, it was the Catholic Church that invented the Tanakh among Christians, way before the Reform movement. And like I said, it was the Reform movement that brought the Tanakh to the Jewish world, which means that throughout Jewish history, you would have never found the Torah bound together with the books of the prophets or the writings. For one, they could act as a stumbling block to laymen who don't know any better, right? Getting them to elevate any other book alongside Torah. And two, we actually have a halakha on what book could be placed on top of another, which would never allow for Tanakh to be compiled, mainly because it places Torah on the bottom. Actually, the only reason offshoots like Christianity and Islam exist is because people started building their doctrines off the esoteric words written in the books of the prophets and not the Torah itself. Actually, Torah is pretty incorruptible, right? Most people creating new movements cannot do so with Torah alone. But what? No. But with poetry and hyperbole and everything else that appears in the books of the prophets. And for those who don't know Hebrew, you throw in an old King James with its archaic English, and poof, this is how new religions are born. Actually, the reason the books of the prophets were compiled, not as canonical, but just as a set of books, was a decision made by the Beit Din of Hezekiah, and also the men of the Great Assembly. They decided to write the vast majority of books that appear in what we call Tanakh today, just to give us a historical account of what took place in Jewish history. And after these scrolls were written, no one really owned a copy of them, mainly because, as you know, books or scrolls at that time were very scarce, even all the way to the printing press. People had to memorize prayers because personal books that had to be copied by hand were not readily available. Now, What there was a lot of were Sifrei Torah, books of the 5 books of Moses, mainly because the Torah itself commanded every Jew to write his own Sefer Torah. So it would not have been hard to believe that every family probably had dozens of Sifrei Torah throughout the generations. Actually, you see that halachot exists on writing Sifrei Torah, but halachot do not exist on writing or copying books of the prophets or writings, with the exception of Megillat Esther, but that's another story. Now, it wasn't until the Tobiads, the Hellenized Jews under the Syrian Greeks, that outlawed the study of Torah in Eretz Israel. There you go, secular Jews at play again. It wasn't until this time that people actually started studying the portions of the prophets that dealt with the Torah portion, or dealt in some way with the Torah portion, right? What we call the Haftarah nowadays. Now, if you notice, it's only after this period that Gnosticism, mysticism ran rampant in Israel. The Essenes, the Sadducees, even Christianity. And from this time on, things were never the same again. Judaism changed, new religions were born, people were persecuted, people were excommunicated, not for halachic reasons, but for hashkafic reasons, for disagreements on philosophical issues, not on Torah issues. All this because people began to elevate books outside of the Torah, the only book that we were meant to unite on. But regardless, the point of these books of the prophets, books that are very important in Judaism, were only to bring Israel back to Torah, and not to build new crazy religions or ideas off of their words. Like it says in Perek Hey of Sefer Yeshayahu, that if anything a prophet teaches does not amplify Torah, then there is no truth within it. Friends, let's return to Torah and together begin repairing this world. For more information about everything Jewish, please visit bejewish.org. Thank you.